Guys, welcome to the new episode of the First Responder Playbook. It is my pleasure to have Dr. Sherry Yellin with me tonight. Dr. Yellin, thank you for joining me. She is author of The Science of High Performance Leadership, the creator of the Cranium mythology, 7 science-backed strategies that help leaders inspire trust, boost engagement, and achieve extraordinary results. With over 30 years of experience coaching leaders and transforming workplace cultures across industries, she blends cutting edge neuroscience with practical tools leaders can apply immediately. Dr. Yellen, thanks for joining me tonight.
It's exciting to be here and especially applying this information to such an important audience. Yeah.
So let me talk a little bit because I like to get a little of my guest history. How did you go down the route of becoming a coach? And how did you go around the route of getting your doctorate?
Well, the story is I wanted to be a college English teacher until I became a college English teacher. And if I had to grade one more 5 paragraph essay, I think I was, going to pull my hair out. And just so happens, a friend of mine called. She was also a colleague, and she was at AT&T. So AT&T in this time in history is definitely not what it is today. Big spools of copper cable in some of their facilities. People are, soldering circuit boards, and it's manufacturing, heavily union. And we were starting a workplace education program because the demands on the employees were growing, more was expected, and they didn't have the skills. At least some of them didn't have the skills to meet those demands. And one day, I was in that role for maybe a week or two, and one of the employees came in, sat down, looked me in the eye, and said, "Out on the floor, I'm known as a bad girl." And then she did what I least expected, which she just broke down crying. And she said, "I can't read. And my sister has always worked right beside me, and they've transferred her." She also cared for an elderly father, so was having to navigate a lot of medical terminology. And I honestly looked at her and said, "I have no idea where we start, but we can give it a try." And we started working together maybe 2 weeks before other people came forward. And now we had a small group that split off into larger groups. And I really just wanted to unscrew the lid and look into her brain and find out what is going on. I've also had that feeling as a mom with teenagers or even people I work with today. Like, how does the brain learn? Because I felt like if we had the answer to that question, we could remove so much guesswork and we could really start to see results. I didn't realize that 30 something years later, I'm fascinated by it, and we're still learning new information every day. But I think the most startling thing is that we're not applying what we do know. And the truth is, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to culture, when it comes to managing conflict, when it comes to your own resilience, there's some really practical, guidelines and strategies that we've learned about how your brain responds that could help us get much better results with a lot less effort. A lot of the time, we are creating the pain we're complaining about. And so when I started my own business in 2001, so that I could focus entirely on that, the idea was to just get this information, especially to leaders, because they're so influential in culture and they're so influential in people's lives. I think, the statistics are that we'll spend 90,000 or more hours of our one and only life at work. And it, people deserve a leader worth following, and recognizing some of this information about this is how your brain really receives and processes information. Let's take that and put it into practice.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree in that. I think that, especially in the first responder world, we often gravitate to places where you want somebody in control, but then you don't necessarily want somebody that's overbearing when you're not in a high stress situation. And so it's kind of a weird world in that, like, you want somebody when the proverbial stuff hits the fan that is in control, but then you also want somebody that knows how to actually lead you when it's not a stressful situation. And so you're right, like, we want a good leader at work. um, and
Yeah,
that's challenging for a lot of places. It
it,
really is.
it really is, because Brent, what you're mentioning is that there are times where, yes, you want to be the commanding, pace setting leader. For example, in a crisis situation, I was in a really bad car accident about 2 years ago, and I remember seconds probably being in the ER, and I remember hearing someone in charge. Well, you want someone in charge in those crisis situations, but you also want to have a variety of leadership styles that you can call on when the result you're looking for is developing your team, or it's resolving conflict, or it's leading change. So part of being a leader worth following to me is being able to say, what's the real result we're going for here? Who are all the players involved? What are the dynamics? And what leadership style is best, rather than relying on one default style, which, by the way, is probably one that you picked up from a leader you had. Either you're emulating that leader or you've decided to do the complete opposite, and neither one is probably going to be best. I love, in one of our workshops, I love to show clips from the Progressive Insurance commercials on becoming your parents, because I think we need one like that on becoming the leader that you had. We just seem to either emulate or go the opposite direction, when in fact, we really need, rather than a hammer, we need Home Depot, right? We need to have lots of styles that we can call on and be okay, even if that style isn't 100% comfortable. It doesn't make it the wrong style, it just means it's uncomfortable. So being able to flex and be leader as coach, and then being able to be in that commanding style, but knowing when the situation requires the shift.
Yeah, it's actually you mentioned that, and the first time I was ever made a supervisor, I don't necessarily think that it went bad, but it wasn't very good either. And it's really because my only formal training was me just trying to emulate not what to do that the person that I didn't like did. And so, and we had a weird dynamic there where we were both of the same rank. And so there wasn't a true like leadership. It was more like, hey, we're still being a cop too.
Mhm.
And it didn't work out very well. And looking back on it, the second time I at a bigger agency that I was made a supervisor, I was smart enough to realize that the first time didn't go very well. And so I sought out additional training to make myself better. Um, because you're right. I just tried to do what the people that weren't working for me, I just tried to do the opposite of that. And it didn't really work either. It wasn't necessarily what was right. It's just I was trying to do exactly the opposite of what they were doing.
Yeah, but the difference is you didn't blame the people for whatever result you got. You were willing to look in the mirror and say, what's this showing up to teach me? And how is this feedback going to make me better? And that mindset is critical. You can, as we say, you can be right or you can be rich. And if you get so overly committed to being right, then you move into blaming everybody else for the bad result. When in fact, your really great leaders are always going to look in the mirror and they're going to, not to beat themselves up, but rather to learn, what's this feedback showing up to teach me? How can I get better? Even better if. I don't know that we ever need to stop asking that question.
Yep. I agree wholeheartedly. So let's talk about, to my audience, what exactly coaching is and like how we can apply that to the first responder world.
So, coaching is such a powerful leadership style because it allows that other person and it allows the team to really grow and develop and take ownership and maybe shift their mindset, see themselves as leaders or see the potential in themselves. And I would say even more importantly than that, gain greater self-awareness. The research shows us that 90% of the population believes that they're extremely self-aware, when in fact only about 8 to 10% really are. So part of coaching is going back to the mirror, is holding that mirror up so that people can recognize where they need to grow. But if I'm going to shift from, let's take that commanding leader to a coaching leader, I've got to enter that with a completely different set of beliefs. And one of those beliefs is that the person that I'm working with, I don't need to solve their problem. I don't need to rush in and fix them. They're not broken. I've got to be able to recognize that they are a whole, resourceful, capable human being. And when I can approach it that way, we can be partners, truly what a coaching relationship should be, true partners in discovering what is the next step or what is their best solution. One way that I like to describe coaching is, oddly enough, is sort of like calling an Uber. Right? So if I call an Uber, first of all, recognize I took the initiative to do that.
Yep.
So in the past, coaching has been considered a punitive thing. You get a coach when you've got one foot out the door. It's like last resort, let's get them a coach, or I'm going to coach them up. We've all heard those phrases. But we really need to suspend that old belief, because coaching is more about recognizing that this person is taking initiative to grow. That's super important. The other way, in time this metaphor runs out, but the other analogy with Uber is that if you call an Uber and it works as it should, they meet you where you are. They are truly trying to find where you are. They don't say, I'm 2 blocks away, and if you hurry up, I can take you where you want to go. So you think about when we are leading as a coach, we really have to put effort into seeing the world through their eyes. And a belief that's so important is recognizing that their reality makes sense to them. And if we can do that, we're not judging it. I'm not saying you have to agree with it. But the point is, I've got to try to understand how either that belief or that action that they just took or that behavior somehow made sense to them. And it's also assuming good intent before I rush into judgment. So you think about that Uber meets you where you are, and they come to a complete stop, ideally.
Yeah.
They let you safely get in the car. So it's not rushed. It really is about meeting somebody where they are and then getting curious about, where do you want to go?
So you made a very good distinction a little bit ago in that in a coaching relationship, the leader is not there to solve their problem. And I think that's where a lot of us first responders struggle, is that we are required to solve the problem in dealing with the public.
Yeah.
We can't shut that off when we deal with ourselves or people we work with. And we want to solve the problem when reality is they're an adult. They're capable of handling most of what they can do. They just need somebody to help get them to that point. And that's a mindset we've got to change.
Yeah, it really starts with shifting some beliefs. And let's take that one, that I'm here to solve problems. Well, there are lots of situations where that's absolutely true, and you want that belief. But if I'm growing and developing others, when I rush in and solve your problem, what I'm really saying is that I don't think you're capable. I don't think you have what it takes. And if I want to grow talent, and that should be the goal of every leader, is to grow others so that when you leave, whether that's on a vacation or you retire, you have a legacy left behind. So if I want to solve their problems, I'm never really communicating to them, I believe in you. I think you have what it takes. Let's start from that place. And then I can help guide, right? But really, when I delegate to you, or if I involve you in finding solutions, what I'm saying is, I believe in you. I believe you have what it takes. I see potential in there, and let's start with that.
Yep.
So, part of, just an easy question when you're developing people, they come to you maybe with a problem before your advice monster breaks loose and you give them all of your worldly wisdom. Maybe we pause and we ask instead, what have you thought about doing? Or what have you considered already? And then be quiet. Don't give multiple choice answers. Have you thought this? Have you thought about that? It's almost like you have to think about in that conversation, after you ask the question, hit the mute button, let it land. Because I guarantee you, they have thought about something. And if you hear, let's say I did that with you, Brent, and you reported to me for some reason, and I said, what have you already thought about? Or what have you thought about doing? Or how have you thought about handling this? You might say, I don't know. But here's a key point. I don't know is a defensive response. It means you think there's one right answer, so your brain's kind of shutting down. If we simply say, well, if you had to guess, you may not know exactly, but if you just had to throw out a couple of ideas, what comes to mind? Because if we were observing your brain in that moment, you would literally see threat decrease. And, just kind of the anatomy of what's going on in that moment is pretty cool. Most people have read something by now about the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that allows us to be mature, responsible, thinking adults, to plan, to have willpower, to be creative and articulate, all those things. Most people have read something about that part of our brain by now. But what we don't recognize is that threat literally hijacks that part of the brain. And that threat is interesting about your brain because your brain doesn't care if the threat is physical or if it's emotional or psychological. It just responds to threat. So a one right answer question can be as much of threat to the brain as a bear coming at you in the woods. Like your brain doesn't care what the threat is. And so you can hear it. Oftentimes the response sounds like, I don't know. Or sometimes you'll hear either or. Either I do this or I do that. That's always a good indication that the brain feels under threat. And if we're coaching as leaders, we want to minimize that. So just having some different questions or just even saying, well, let's put either over here and let's put or on this end of the continuum. And let's just what other options and what else and what else and what else. Michael Bungay-Stanier, I love his work. He calls that the awe question. And what else and what else and what else? Because you are lowering threat. You're turning back on the prefrontal cortex, which is also the seat of creativity and innovation that allows you to get unstuck and see options. But you're also building trust and connection with that person because you've truly become a partner in solving the problem. And what this means is that you've better equipped that person for the next situation and the next situation to not only have the confidence, but also maybe a different skill set and how to solve their problem so they don't keep coming to you with the same problem.
You know what's funny is you touched on something that I was actually going to head that direction, and so it's weird, um, in that, especially in the first responder world, the old mentality of, well, I'm the supervisor, I'm the one that leads all the time, really probably needs to change, because you see first responders all the time and doing things that, you see these videos of things they shouldn't be doing. Would they be doing that if we actually challenge them to be a leader all the
Mhm.
time? Because we're out there making life and death decisions. You need to be confident in your leadership abilities to take charge and to handle situations that are presented in front of you. And if you're worried about running to somebody else to solve your problem, are you really leading at that point? And so I think we have to change that culture of, well, I'm only going to, make this leadership change for my formal supervisors.
Yep.
No, like these officers that are out there making the decisions every day need to be trained as leaders as well, because yes, there still needs to be a hierarchy of leadership, but they need to be a leader out there on the front lines when they're dealing with people.
They do, and you're equipping them really with those problem-solving skills. If if I am, again, if I've got one leadership style, it really is like running around with a hammer. And it's going to be great for certain situations, but in other situations, I'm not growing. I want to challenge a couple of beliefs that I see hinder leaders from moving into that coaching role. And one of those mentioned before we jumped on here, which is the belief that I have to be right. And the better statement here, or the healthier belief, is that I can be right or I can be rich. So, where there are times clearly where you need to be right, you tell people what to do. I'm not saying in those situations, but is it more important to be right or rich? And rich in growing my team and growing a culture of people that feel empowered to think for themselves and solve problems. And then from there, maybe come up with innovative solutions and take initiative. And therefore, you're growing loyalty. And now we've got a great culture. Now we've got a department that people are clamoring to get onto because the culture is so incredible and people are growing. So, one of the beliefs to just sit with is, where is my need to be right interfering with being rich? And another belief that I see really hinders growth is related to, I can have control or I can have growth, but I can't necessarily have both at the same time in equal proportion. So let's take delegation, for example. We've all heard it. Right? If you want something done right, do it yourself, or
Yep.
it's just faster if I do it myself. Well, a true statement is, it's just faster if you get better at delegating. Because if you're not delegating, you're not growing anyone. You could look at all the research that shows, and we could probably talk about it personally. When have you grown the most in your career? When have you grown the most in life? It's probably when someone entrusted you with something, gave you good, clear guidelines on how to address it, or at least was supportive, and you maybe made some mistakes along the way, but you learned in the process. And so as long as we're holding tight to the need to be right and the need to be in control, we have to suspend those needs when it comes to, how am I growing the people around me? Because in the end, that's really what you're trying to accomplish. Otherwise, you will be solving the same problem 5 years from now that you are today. So here's the thing, if you decide to do that, don't complain about it. Because you chose that. And it's just recognizing where are some of these beliefs that I might have adopted through the years or may have been passed down generations in the department. Where are those beliefs no longer serving me? And just because a belief feels familiar doesn't make it a healthy belief. It just makes it familiar.
Yep.
It's probably challenging your belief. A good indicator is it feels really uncomfortable. And being okay with moving into a place of being uncomfortable. It's probably
Yep.
going to make you feel really uncomfortable to delegate that because it feels faster if you just do it yourself.
Yep.
But in the end, that's not what a leader's out there to produce. A leader's results are going to be those people that if you come back after retirement and they talked about how you grew their confidence and you grew their career and you gave them a safe space to maybe make some mistakes without huge consequences, but learn from them. Like that's the product or that's the service that is the indicator that you've been a successful leader. Not that you ran around with a hammer and solved everybody's problems.
Yeah, I think we oftentimes think of a leader as the person that solves everything and not as the person that leads.
Mhm.
And we have to slow down and think it's literally called lead or not do everythinger.
Yeah.
And, you know, there is a time and place for that. But that's not an everyday thing, and it leads to a lot more stress and unnecessary like culture issues when you try to just be the authoritarian and do everything yourself.
Yeah, because the cost that you're paying is no one's really loyal to you. Probably no one really likes you, to be honest. You're not building confidence, you're not building a skill set. And when you think about again, what's the measure, what's the scoreboard for a leader? And just again, back to beliefs. If we hang on to the belief that the value I bring is in giving everybody advice and solving everybody's problems. If we could trade that to the value I bring is developing individuals to be the next generation of great leaders, or it is developing a team to come together and to be able to solve. Actually, in a way, your scoreboard winning on on a leader scoreboard looks like you're now freed up from all of that to focus on vision and strategy. That's where your focus gets to be when you can build a competent team.
Yeah, I think you knocked that out of the park, um, because I always try to remind myself in that I want people to be better than when I got here, and so
Yeah.
you want them to come behind you when you're gone 10 years from now and you're in a different assignment. You want the people behind you to do better than you did.
Mhm.
And we often, especially in the first responder world, we get so competitive with each other in that we don't want to share our secrets. Why? Like our goal at the end of the day, we have to remember that we're servants
Yeah.
and our goal is to help the public in making sure they're safe in their homes at night, or making sure that if there's a medical emergency that they get to the hospital in time, or there's a fire, make sure the fire's put out. Well, if you can put that fire out quicker, why would you not tell your partner next to you?
Mhm.
And we get so territorial. I want to be the one that does this. No, like, let's celebrate our teammates wins just as much as our own. And that's how you start building that culture of we're all going to do good, not just me. And
You
it
point out like these are some key indicators of the health of a culture. If you've got a healthy culture, and in other words, when I say healthy, it's a place where people can grow and become the best version of themselves, make contributions, be innovative. Those are some of the outcomes. But in those cultures, some observable signs: people do share information, they're collaborative, they come in with a mindset of not make me happy, but how can I contribute and make this place better? Some indicators of unhealthy or even toxic cultures: people are defensive, they're overly committed to being right. They've got to be the smartest person in the room. They'll have the last word in the meeting. They, demand respect through a title rather than it's not given. But here's the thing: in that threat culture, in telling, commanding style all the time, you probably will get compliance. Most people will comply because they want to keep their job.
yeah,
But what you're forfeiting is commitment. You're not going to get commitment so that, you've got that loyalty, that they'll go above and beyond because there's such a bond and there's such a respect for each other and for the leadership. And the other thing at least we see, is that in that toxic culture, you know what you do? You attract other toxic people.
yes,
In that healthy culture, you get your A players, because A players don't want to play with C players. That's been quoted a lot by a lot of different people, but it's true. People want high accountability and high performance, and they want to be in a place where they can become the best version of themselves, especially in a role. I have a whole family of first responders, and especially in a role that is not a job. It is a career, it is a calling. It becomes so integrated in your life, unlike really any other job that people choose to go to. They don't go to the office and come home. It's who you are. It becomes such a big part of your identity. And so you attract more great people when you're willing to do that.
I agree wholeheartedly. So I want to talk about integrating some of the coaching ideas into our leadership, uh, you know, for first responders. Let's talk about the Cranium model and how we can apply that to first responders.
So, I'll just be super high level, 7 brain based strategies. The first one is the challenge strategy. And it really is about deliberately identifying and minimizing threat and increasing trust. Because if I'm not doing that, then I haven't set the brain up for success in the first place. So just recognizing the impact of threat, and just one of the there's threat, right? Not all threat is bad. Some's motivating. The threat of maybe getting hurt causes me to drive more carefully or whatever.
Right.
But negative threat typically meets about 3 criteria. There's some level of uncertainty or the unknown. Think about that. Change. It isn't really that your brain's resisting change, your brain's resisting uncertainty. So, what's the opposite of that? Clarity. So, being able to provide a team clear guidelines, or being able to give the why behind maybe a policy change. A second criteria for negative threat is I don't feel like I have a lot of choice or voice or agency in it. So, a leader who's following this strategy is going to look for those opportunities. How can I involve people in decisions that impact them? You can't all the time, we know that, but many times you can. You can give them at least some level of choice. And then the third criteria for negative threat is that my brain is anticipating a negative consequence. COVID was a great example of all 3 of those things coming together. And you saw like a whole nation go berserk. And so if I recognize that as a leader, then that kind of leads to the second strategy, which is the relevant strategy, which is leading with vision, leading with values. Like, what's our bigger why? What is our vision? What's the purpose we're accomplishing here? And not only, I think a lot of emphasis has been put on why, and that is important. Your brain does need purpose, but even more importantly, it needs to be placed on how. It's not just why we're doing what we're doing, but how we're going to go about it. So making sure there's clearly defined values or non-negotiables or beliefs, whatever you choose to call them, but everybody knows that we're going to get to this vision, but we're going to do it in this particular kind of way. The third strategy is the action strategy, which oddly is recognizing the brain's limitations, recognizing that sometimes you can't make the brain cheaper, better, faster. Sometimes it really is about recovery, or it is about recognizing I can't ask our people to do one more thing. So we talk a lot there about how do you really create an environment that's designed the way your brain works. A good example with first responders is sleep. Like, your brain can't operate without sleep. So think about the officer that's worked all night and then goes home only to get called back for some kind of training, or like, we have to really think about this. That would be like you expecting your phone to operate at maximum capacity with 2% battery. And most of us are operating more in alignment with how our computer phone works than our brain. So sleep's just one example of that. And then novelty strategy is, how do we foster a culture of innovation? Well, it relates to the first three, because first of all, to be innovative, you've got to have an environment of trust. No one's going to take a risk and try something new if they know that there's not, some parameters that they can play and experiment a little bit, because you're not going to get the decision right every single time. But it's also what's the vision here? And then how do we best innovate? Well, it's not in isolation. Nothing really. Sometimes we get this image of a mad scientist in the basement, all alone, having this great idea. That only happens in the movies. In reality, innovation happens because there's collaboration. And just what you said, there's sharing of information, and how can we help each other? So those are the first four. The last three, I is interaction strategy. How are we involving people? And it's recognizing that your brain doesn't buy into what it's told to do. It buys into what it helps build. Another reason why coaching as a leadership style is so powerful, because you're engaging that person in a partnership, right, to figure out solutions and actions. So that interaction strategy, the U is really around emotional intelligence. So here's a belief shift for you, because I think most of the time I hear this a lot. I don't make emotional decisions. Well, the truth is you do, because your brain, we're not, thinking individuals who happen to have emotions. We're emotional individuals who happen to think. We're making emotional decisions all the time, and we're justifying them with logic. But we absolutely are. And recognizing that information, events are always first and foremost processed through the emotional center of the brain. And ideally, it partners well with the prefrontal cortex, and we make better decisions. But when emotion fuels threat, that's when you create more defensiveness, or worse, you end up on the 10 o'clock news. So recognizing that gets into triggers and a lot of things like that. And then the final strategy is what we call the mosaic strategy, because it goes so far beyond inclusion. While that's important, in fact, one of the one of the biggest threats to your brain is social rejection. If you were to look at brain scans of social rejection and brain scans of physical pain, they're virtually identical. But it goes so much further beyond inclusion and, some of our old ways of thinking about that. And it really is about what's everything we're bringing to this situation, all of our similarities, all of our differences, all of our strengths, all of our weaknesses, just like you would imagine in a mosaic, all those fragments. And a great leader is one that sees the potential in all of that and can bring it together. And so it's kind of high level overview, but the beauty is when you think about being a leader worth following, or you think about creating a culture that's healthy, the good news is like science shows us the way. We can remove a lot of the guesswork simply by aligning our actions and mainly our beliefs, first and foremost, with how the brain really processes information and responds. And how do we get the most out of this piece of technology is really the answer.
Well, and I love that in that each one of those of the 7 different things is so important because it's like baking a cake.
Great analogy.
Knowing that, like, one of it may be vanilla and it's okay on its own. One of it may be salt, and some of it may be sugar, and they're okay on their own. But when you put them together and put it together as a cake, it turns into something amazing.
Yeah.
And we have to realize that the whole old way of thinking of we're just going to keep doing it the same way. Um, this is the way we've always done it. We've got to stop thinking like that. And we have to realize that generational gaps occur, cultural gaps occur, and us in the leadership role have to fill those in to make a good agency culture.
Yeah, and I would say on top of that is that in order to rewrite beliefs, you have to have new experiences. You got to create new experiences. Some of us have had one experience with one person and you form a belief. It's really hard to rewrite it.
Yep.
But you have to create new experiences. So I would just challenge, those that are listening that, have teams right now, even start small. Like, where is there one place where you can hit pause on all the great advice that you're going to give and just first ask a question? What have you thought about doing? Or before you rush in and take it over, ask that person, how could I be helpful? And again, in the appropriate situation, I mean, clearly in a crisis, you don't want to, pull out the flip chart and smelly markers and start brainstorming options, but recognizing too, what is the ultimate result I'm trying to create here? And if that is an evolved, developed future officer, then let's start getting them on that path. And circling back one last time to the Uber, once you get in the car, usually the first question they ask is confirming, where do you want to go? Start there. Like, what's important to that person that's under your leadership? What is it that they aspire to do? And they may be a long way from it. And that's okay. But we have a better idea of how to help them get there.
Yep. Wholeheartedly. As we start to wrap up, I want to, I'm going to challenge you with one final question in a minute. But before we get there, if people want to reach out to you or learn, you've got a book. Where can they get in contact with you at? Learn more about what you offer, and more about your book if they want to, go down some more of these ideas.
Yeah, so the book will be out in October of this year, and I'm so proud of. I wrote a book in 2019, and I was proud that I finished it. This book, I'm so proud to put it out in the world because it is packed with so many resources that people can use. So I'm very excited about that. We're at yellingroup.com. The other thing is we do a session every single month. We work with leaders from a lot of different industries, and it's a free session once a month, the third Tuesday of every month. We call the Leading Lab, where these leaders come together. It's Zoom, virtual, no camera required. A lot of people are driving into work because it's from 8 to 8:45 Central in the morning. But we just do a deep dive into one single topic and ideally give you some information and inspiration so you can get back out there. And all that information is available on our website too. But that's a time where I love that session because we do narrow the focus and you gain perspectives from a lot of different industries. And I find that every single industry suffers from this, where we get so fixated and so focused on our industry that we stop maybe looking for best practices from other industries that would apply. We all do it because, we're creatures of habit. Going back to those experiences, we seem to, duplicate the same experiences over and over and over. So that's another great way to just get involved in what we do. And so it's just yellingroup.com.
Love it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to challenge you as one last thing. And it's not going to be a coaching thing. It's going to be more of a mentor view. For the next generation of emerging leaders, what would be your best piece of advice to them?
So the cynical side of me is the bar is low, right? So just recognizing that early on, really connecting with your purpose. Where is it that you want to go? How do you want people to describe you when you're not in the room? Recognizing that life is happening for you, not to you, so that you don't have a victim mentality. Moving from blame, criticism, condemning, the need to be offended, the need to be superior, to a place of what's mine to own here? How can I make a change? Where can I make a change? And I think those few things alone, really dialing into what lights you up and how do you take ownership of that? Because I grew up at my grandparents', and my grandmother every single day watched The Price is Right. And sometimes that can be a metaphor for life for people. They just wait to be called on down. But the truth is, like, as far as we know, this is our one and only life. And we don't know how long we have to be here. And I believe that every single person has something that lights them up on purpose. Take ownership of that, take responsibility for that, and take action in making it happen rather than sitting back, and waiting to be discovered.
Love that. Love it. Maybe just because I'm of the generation that I watched The Price is Right with my grandma too, but I love the analogy. Dr. Yellin, I don't want to tie you up the rest of the night. Thank you for joining me, and you are always welcome back here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Have a good night.
Thank you.